So to kick off this morning, let's think back to the past 2 weeks, the first video that we watched on the real versus ideal and sort of striving for things, but understanding that in your striving, you're not necessarily reaching perfection, but you can always kind of take examples. Has anything kind of been swirling around in your brain since then? Have things kind of come up, or in your parenting and in your life of living with your children, have you kind of connected the dots with some of the things we've been talking about with real life yet?
It's all still a mystery to me.
Well, I've used it twice, once in counseling and talking about the real versus the ideal. I just found that to be really impactful. And, particularly with, college-age children, but, the whole social media thing, I think, sets people up for the ideal. I want to look the best. I want to be the happiest. I want to have the most fun. Anyway, it was a great teaching moment. I wouldn't call it a defining moment. And I'm also trying to encourage my oldest daughter, who has a young teenager, to watch these Andy Stanley videos, because we've just found them to be amazing. And I don't know, I wish we could also find a way to get more people on here, because I don't know, I think what he has to say is very meaningful.
Maybe we could write like a little social media blurb about this class, like Andy Stanley parenting tips you don't want to miss, like, I don't know, Addie, just really big and bold. And I don't know how to get people on, but just some way to catch their eye through Instagram, or I don't know what we have to offer in that arena.
We certainly can, but also word of mouth. Just tell people, I've been going to this class and I found it helpful, or this is what I've learned,
Maybe just throwing out one little tidbit, some, one-liner from Andy Stanley that might grab somebody's attention. Yeah.
Well, once again, he's back this week and has, I think, lots more good to say. We've been splitting this up. So this is, when he did this Sunday school, it was a 4-part series. Here comes Aaron. It was a 4-part series, and so we've been kind of breaking it up. So this is his second class, but it's obviously our third. So we'll watch the first half of it. So when he references, like, last week I said this and it was 2 weeks ago, don't worry. You've not scrambled your timelines. We've just been kind of taking it slow and breaking it up a little bit more. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. Good morning, Aaron. And we're starting off talking about what we were sort of just reflecting on, which is that there's not always a whole lot of great examples of parenting in the Bible, but it doesn't mean that we don't have to learn a lot. And there's not great resources within the Bible that kind of, when applied and molded, can really speak to parenting. So we'll start off there, which is sort of where we all started anyway. Okay. So our clip is going to be about 10 minutes long. So settle in and let's see what he has to say this morning.
You know that when it comes to good examples of family and when it comes to good examples of parenting, there are virtually none to be found in the Bible. In fact, when it comes to examples of real life family dysfunction, the Bible is actually your go-to source. It is full of family dysfunction. In fact, apparently even Jesus didn't get along with his own siblings. They thought he was crazy. They thought he was crazy until after the resurrection, and then there was like a collective, oh, well, that explains things. But in terms of learning anything about parenting, even from the story of Jesus isn't even helpful. But Jesus and the authors of the New Testament specifically, I think, pointed the way forward for parents. And while Jesus never talked about parenting directly, he laid the foundation for New Testament parenting when he laid the foundation for New Testament behavior. Did I mention that your behavior will determine whether or not your children will want to be like you, with you, or even like you? Anyway, so Jesus laid the foundation for his followers' behavior when he issued his new covenant command. We talk about this all the time. He called it his new command. A new command I give you, he said, not to be added to the existing commands. His new command was designed to replace all the existing commands. As we've discussed before, the Apostle Paul referred to this all-encompassing new command as the law of Christ, which is to love others as Jesus loved us. Now, one of the things that we're fond of saying around here is that following Jesus will make your life better and it will make you better at life. And to the point of this series, following Jesus will make you a better parent, because at the core of being a Jesus follower is an ethic of others first, an ethic of selflessness. And nothing, let's face it, nothing services our self-centeredness and our selfishness quicker and fiercer than raising another human being. A human being that comes into the world with one agenda, the same agenda that we came into the world with, and it's this: what's in it for me, and I want my way. And if I can't get my way, I'm gonna get in your way and I'm gonna make your life miserable. So think about it. From day one, the stage is set for a clash of wills of epic proportion, a clash of wills that has the potential to bring out the worst in us, the fear in us, the insecurity in us, the anger in us, let's be honest, the ugly in us. In fact, the most shame I've ever felt as an adult is related to my self-centered, where did that come from responses to my own kids. So here's the thing. It is in the eventual conflict of wills associated with parenting that the core ethic and value system of Jesus, it actually becomes more relevant than ever, because insecurity and anger and fear, what are those? Those are all manifestations of self-preservation and reputation preservation on our part, both of which fuel the very behaviors that drive a wedge between us and our children. Behaviors that cause us to lose influence once they're old enough for us to have lost control. In fact, one of the reasons it is so much easier to know how other people should raise their kids is that their kids' behavior doesn't reflect poorly on us. Our kids' behavior points directly back to us. And our response, this is so important, our response is a great deal about who and what we are most concerned about. And when we get it right, when we are able to keep our ego and our pride in check, when we're able to respond out of concern for our kids rather than in response to how our kids' behavior reflects on us, our response has the potential to create not only teachable moments, but defining moments. And I'll give you an example. When I was in the 8th grade, and let me put this in embarrassing context. When I was in the 8th grade, which was 48 years ago, let that sink in for a moment. 48 years ago, I had a conversation with my dad that I still remember to this day. Now, I didn't realize it at the time, but this was a defining moment in terms of my understanding as a kid of where I stood in relationship to my father's desire to protect his reputation. Now, this is important. We should all protect our reputation. My dad was concerned about his reputation, as I am, as you are. Our reputations are important, but our children are important as well, right? These are both values. These are both things that we value. And in life, we're constantly prioritizing our values. And our children are watching, and they are experiencing how we prioritize our values and how we prioritize them. And one misguided response or one misguided remark has the power to undo a lot of affirmation. Anyway, so my dad is a pastor, and at the time, our church was located downtown Atlanta on Peachtree Street, 1 block north of the famous Fox Theater. But more importantly to this story, our church was located about 3 blocks east of the Varsity Restaurant. Now, for those of you who have never been to Atlanta, the Varsity Restaurant is the largest drive-in restaurant in the world. But not only did it have slots for cars, back in the day, it had what I will call eating rooms. I don't want to say dining rooms. There wasn't a lot of dining going on at the varsity. These eating rooms were basically full of plastic chairs all in a row, attached to plastic little tables. Think, fifth grader desk. And they're all facing in the same direction toward a television hanging from the ceiling. Now, the varsity was within walking distance of our church. So right after Sunday school, my best friend Louis Giglio and I would slip out the back, head out to the varsity, order some food, find an empty eating room because most of them were empty on Sunday mornings. And then one of us would risk our lives standing up on the table attached to the chair to manually change the channel of the television to our church worship service, which was broadcast live on Channel 5. And then we would sit and talk and eat and pay just enough attention to the sermon to be able to comment on it intelligently on the ride home with our parents. We wouldn't lie exactly, we just deceived. Anyway, we would have enough information to give them the impression that we were actually in church listening to my dad preach. And that brings me to this most memorable moment with my father. We were driving home from church. It was just the two of us, and I was sitting directly behind him in our green Grand Safari station wagon. You may remember those. The third seat faced backwards. Anyway, I'm sitting right behind him, so there's no eye contact. And at some point in the conversation, he said, "Andy, Evelyn told me that someone told her that they saw you and Louie leaving church and leaving the church property right after Sunday school." And then he paused. Now, Evelyn was my dad's secretary. We had secretaries in those days. When he said that, I didn't say anything. I assumed I knew what was coming next, and I assumed it would not be pleasant. And then, after what seemed like an eternity, he said something I would never forget. But when he said it, he had no idea I would never forget it. And that 48 years later, I would still remember it. Here's what he said. He said, "And Andy, do you know what I told her?" I said, "No, sir." He said, "I told her, you tell your friend to raise her kids and I'll raise mine." Silence. That was it. He didn't follow up with, "But if you and Louie ever skip," none of that. He just dropped it. And he never brought it up again. And in that moment, I felt drawn in rather than pushed away. I felt important. I felt like my dad sided with me rather than against me. And next week, I'm going to talk to you about how you can side with your kids when you're disciplining your kids, so don't miss next week. Now, I didn't have words for it then, but at a level that I probably couldn't even have understood as an 8th grader, on that day, I knew I was more important to my dad than his public reputation. His ego was in check. He put me first, and I felt it, and honestly, I still feel it. That was some really good parenting. And here's the interesting thing, and this won't surprise you. The next Sunday, Louie and I were on the second row. Now, here's the thing. A defining moment is better than a teachable moment. We love teachable moments as parents, but I'm telling you, a defining moment is better than a teachable moment. But they are so easy to miss when our ego is not in check, when our reputation is on the line. What we do and how we respond, how we behave when our ego is on the line, it leaves a mark for good or for bad. Now, before I get back to what Jesus had to say, one more little ancillary lesson that's related to this particular story. I mentioned that my dad in that moment, he put me first as in ahead of his reputation. But one thing he and my mom never did, they never put me in the center. My parents never allowed me or my sister to control the family dynamic by placing us in the center. And this is really important, and this is something a lot of parents miss, especially first-time parents. One of the best pieces of advice Sandra and I received early on was this. And again, when we heard this, we didn't even have kids. They said, you were already a family before you had children. You were already a family before you had children. Your children are simply a welcome addition to something that already exists. This is so important because let's face it, the gravitational pull is for the child or for our children to become the center of a family. And that is a mistake. They are welcome additions. Don't make them the main act. So back to where we start.
Okay. Like usual, that was a lot all at once. You can see why we break it up and don't just watch his great content the whole way through the first time. So I have some places that I think we could discuss, but I want to sort of leave it up to y'all. What's your takeaway from that? Like what got you thinking during that clip?
Well, for me, it makes me want to do over most of both my girls' high school. I was the mom that it's like an alarm bell goes off inside of you when you hear your kids did something wrong. And I mean, my daughter, I'll just say she was involved in a hit and run, not a kid, and I mean, she didn't kill anybody. She hit a car, left the scene thinking she didn't do any damage. It was an undercover police car, and the whole thing was filmed. And we get a call from the police that have gone to capture her at Greenville High. It was such a big deal at the time. Now we just laugh about it because it all ended up fine. It was all a big misunderstanding. But on my way there, and I'll never forget how I felt. I had no concern for her, no concern for how scared she was, no concern. And I'm just telling on myself, and I wish I could do it over. It was all about, what will the parents think? What's the principal going to think? What are the police going to think? They're all going to be looking at me. What a terrible mom you are. How could you let your daughter be so, whatever. And any time. And it was always that alarm bell, and it was anger and rage and embarrassment and shame. And I look back on that, 15 years later, and I just want to kick myself. And now that she's like my best friend and she's mature and grown up, and I can't get that moment back, the way I acted. And it was she was just crumpled in a heap, a crying pile. And all I could do was yell at her for embarrassing me and making me look bad. And I don't know what that is, or if anyone else has ever had that, or if y'all are just able to completely focus on the child like Charles did with Andy. I wish I'd had that advice, that it really, because those people aren't the people you're going to have a relationship with the rest of your life. It's your kid. So how you respond in those moments, the people that are looking at you, they're all just as guilty of not parenting well. And so if they're judging you, who cares? They'll be gone from your life in a minute, but your child will always remember how you reacted. And I remember how my dad reacted one time when I wrecked a car. He punched a hole in the wall. Never said, "Are you okay?" So I kind of emulated that. Y'all are probably thinking we're terrible people, but it wasn't that dramatic. But I'm just saying, if you have young kids, God, take that advice and run with it. Don't ever let your fear of other people's ideas of your parenting get in the way of your relationship with your kids. So that's all I've got.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
That is such a great example, Elizabeth, and I can certainly put myself in that place where my ego took hold, and it was all about, oh my gosh, what is everybody going to think? I'm a bad parent. How embarrassing! Everyone will be talking. Right there, to me, is the reason that I so wish more people were on here. I wish that I had been in this place years back when someone who had already gone through this was giving those types of examples. I mean, we're not born with a manual, and we all have reactions, that time between the stimulus and the response, and we go on our emotions because we weren't taught how to handle our emotions, really. So thanks for sharing that. I wish more people could hear it.
Will, I'm just curious, with young children, how do you feel about that? Do you feel like that's beneficial to your parenting to know that when your kids do eventually do something really big wrong, because they will, how you're going to respond? I'm just curious if that resonates with you, if you're like, no, I would never react that way, or.
think it definitely will. And if they do half the bad things I've done, then we're okay. I'm definitely due. It made me think of an event that one of the many that I chose to do that was a bad decision. I was 14 and I decided to take my mom's car for a joyride in the middle of the night and go pick up a buddy. And we were going to go to this place that we'd scoped out that we thought would sell us cigarettes. And we had predetermined the time. There was no cell phones and stuff. So we had said on this date at this time at this location, I'm going to come get you. Give me about a 10-minute window in case I've got some delays. Our driveway curved around at the back of the house. So as I was putting her car in neutral and turning the wheel, my forearm hit the horn.
Ah,
And my parents' bedroom was right next to the driveway, but up one level. So I froze. I had my foot on the ground with the door open that I was pushing. And I was like, okay, I can do this. No lights came on. So I was pushing again. I turned the wheel a little bit more, hit the horn a second time. I was thinking, okay, now the lights are definitely coming on. And so I looked up, nothing. So I was like, at this point, I'm just going to start it and pull out. So I started it, pulled out, and I made it on time for my buddy. We went to the store, and of course, they didn't sell us anything that we were looking for. And so we drove around in the middle of the night, Columbia, South Carolina, just knew the roads, felt like I knew how to drive, obviously, somehow made it back safely. When I got home, there was a cop car in the driveway. And I pulled up, and as soon as I parked the car, I'd open the door. My parents were just blown away. They said that they didn't even think about checking my room. So there was that level of guilt. And then also like they view me a certain way that I wouldn't have done this. And getting to the point that stuck with me most is after they decided that I'm not going to be able to get my driving permit until I was 16, even though 15 was the age, which was crushing. My dad looked at me and goes, "I'm proud of you." And I said, "Help me understand this one." And he said, "You made a commitment to a friend and you stuck with it." I was like, wow, okay. And that translated into sports. You're committing to a sports team. That translated into you're going to a certain college and you're doing certain things. And that has carried with me forever.
that is impactful. Wow. They stuck with the punishment, but also gave you a window into who the person you could become because of your commitment to something. That's good parenting.
Yeah. And there's other examples when I would foul up majorly, and the punishment would be befitting, but they would just say and do things that I don't know. I think it's because my dad didn't really have much of a dad, and he wanted differently, and maybe he just focused a lot on my mom. She was a great person, public school teacher forever, and did all those classes and actually applied them. So while they were not perfect and we all have our shortcomings, I try to emulate those. And I love the story you shared, Elizabeth.
Well, I'm telling you, I wish I could push rewind sometimes, but we can't do that, unfortunately. But I do have a 12-year-old, so I'm hoping that I get to, it's going to be perfect. It's going to be perfect. Yeah, right. Anyway, well, thank you for sharing.
There's plenty more.
I'm glad you're able to see to see that. I feel like a lot of people are not open to suggestions, and I think that's why this class is so great. And Greta, we got to figure it out, how to get it out there. I don't have social media anymore. I had to put myself in timeout, so I don't have any way of getting it out there. But if y'all do,
Yeah, that's a great idea. But I want to say, you are the light at the end of the tunnel here by not only sharing the mistake and how you wish you could rewind, but guess what? You also said, my daughter is my best friend now. So see, even though we make mistakes, they're redeemable, forgiven,
they're very forgiving, those kids.
I've been there and I feel the same way, huh?
The thing is, though, and Will, you have an example that comes to your mind when your children get to the age where they'll do those things. You have to keep it in mind. It's not, you know, when we react spontaneously to something like Elizabeth going up to the school, you know, she was under a lot of stress then. And so she, you know, at the time, she's not driving up to the school saying, okay, this is going to be a definable moment and I'm getting ready to show the parent. She didn't have that capacity. So she has to develop the preconceived notion that she's going to do it before it happens. And we don't learn that spontaneously. So, you know, I'm glad you remember what your dad did well about that, and you can maybe keep that in mind when it comes up, because my father was very calm person too. I remember the first time, and I still remember this now, in the 10th grade, taking the car, going to some school dance, hold of beer, and I remember, you know, I came home, I had been drinking, and the next day was Sunday, you know, time to go to Sunday school and church and everything. And my father knew what had happened, and my mother rode with me to church, and she said, she didn't fuss or anything. She just said, this car smells like a brewery. And, you know, and I just remember that, like you remember your parents saying that. I knew the disappointment, you know, there, and I didn't need to be fussed at. I just knew that they were both disappointed. So it's just hard to have the preconceived notion in advance to be able to do that. I'm slightly envious in some ways of Will. He still has this before him. And of course, Elizabeth, you have a
And
third.
Aaron and Catherine.
Yeah, y'all too. Y'all have a third chance, and Elizabeth has a third chance on number 3 to do it over again.
Well, I guess we've sort of talked about it, but how would y'all kind of in the moment, because you mentioned that, Brown, that it's so hard to, in the moment, recognize something as the potential for a defining moment versus a teachable moment. So what do y'all think about, like, what kind of differentiates the two, and how do you know you're in the middle of one while you're in it?
You know that there is a way to know, perhaps. I mean, I think that because some of the stuff I was reflecting back on, listening to the stories and listening to what Andy Stanley said, I mean, some of the moments I'm remembering were small. It wasn't, you know, I couldn't have driven a car when I was 14 if I, you know, had to. You know, so there wasn't, I'm not thinking of huge things like that. But little things that, you know, I remember mostly my dad being the one to, you know, kind of give the reasonable response and kind of guide what needed to happen and how we were going to deal with the situation. And I'm not sure that at the time he would have recognized that this was a huge defining moment or this was hugely important. More that if we focus on what we are aware is important and keep in mind the things that we're learning now and that we're, you know, discussing with our peers, and being consistent with the way we deal with things, and being open and honest and loving in the time to deal with the punishment as well as any ramifications that there would be. Sometimes the little moments become defining moments rather than huge things necessarily. And I don't know, I haven't encountered anything as a parent myself yet that I would consider huge in terms of dealing with punishments or anything like that. But I do think just the way that we react to the everyday can kind of lend itself to that, and helping us know how to react when the bigger times do come along.
And that sort of goes into with what he was talking about of, like, you're always weighing your values. like not everything can be number one priority at all times, but you have to choose, perception, ego, your kid's well-being, getting somewhere on time. I mean, there's lots of things that sort of hang in the balance, but I guess what you're saying, Catherine, is that if you can sort of be aware of kind of how you valued things and how you've prioritized things, and that it does matter in the little moments and the big moments.
I think part of that is training and putting yourselves in those environments, and the training piece could be something like we're doing. Being, I'm definitely a big dumb animal, and in the military, all the training that we did became habitual when you were put in certain environments, right? And having your spouse keep you in check if that's an opportunity, or as a single parent, maybe have some sort of mantra when things are starting to hit the fan. I think the humility that comes with life experiences, and then hearing stories that Elizabeth shared and being able to use those and absorb them as personal and have that be a trigger could be another way to potentially, and when in the moment, think, remember what Elizabeth said, or at least my child's not as bad as Will was, that kind of thing.
I was trying to distinguish between what makes a defining moment and what defines a teachable moment. The best thing that I can get from this right now is that several of these instances, Andy Stanley's specifically, and then what other people have shared is, things like that defining moment for the parent is they respond calmly, not out of anger. It's right then on the spot. A defining moment to me is one that happens in the midst of that horrible thing. Whereas a teachable moment, I think, is something you can reflect on later when everybody's calm and say, now remember how we did this, and, use examples. But the defining moment is that which happens in the heat of the moment. And that this really stands out to me, but the least words said seem to have the biggest impact. So the response by the parent is short, loving, direct, and it's just, they're not going on and on and on,
Well, I want to give us a chance to talk about sort of where he was going towards the end of the clip that we watched, which was, and we touched on it some last week, but I'll quote from him: "Your children are welcome additions to a family that already existed." How did that hit you this morning?
I tried to get my phone up to take a picture of it in time. I'll send it to Lauren. She's out of town, but I think she would like to see that.
Yeah, I thought that made me feel better. It made me think of what we were talking about last week as I was considering the article about, keeping your kids out of your marriage or whatever. I think that's so true. And I also think that it's true that I don't know how we would do it, but like somehow to set that example, like for couples or before they do have children, to sort of emphasize that, like that you're aware of that going in. I think that we as people and as a society don't do a good job of considering a couple a family, prior to kids being there. And even if kids never come into that relationship, that's still a family, and being respectful of that and loving that and supporting that, I think, is really important. And I spent some time this week reflecting back on some of what it was sort of a fleeting moment in the conversation last week, because I struggled a little bit with some of the conversation about, how the family had to be the two parents and the children, however many, and all that kind of stuff. And we did take a little bit of time to say, you know, there are some beautiful families out there that don't have mom and dad necessarily there, and that we need to be supportive of that, and that they can be great examples too. They can be wonderful parents, and that we need to love them and embrace them and support them as well. So I think just giving some time and consideration into how we support couples, support families that don't look like what, you know, the example he was giving in the talk last week, and that kind of thing. They're just as worthy and just as valid as any other family.
And I think that's exactly right. And more and more and more going forward, there are single parents, there are same-sex parents, there are, I mean, I think that the definition of family has grown so much, and actually Andy is extremely supportive of all of that. I think in this talk, maybe it seemed like but he is supportive of all families. But I agree, Catherine, we need to nurture that idea that, you know, two people are a family, one person and one kid is a family. All of that. Yeah, I agree. The one thing that stuck with me about that was, you know, everyone said James and I were married 4 years before we had our first daughter. And that was so wonderful. And I'm so glad we did that. And everyone said, when you have a child, it will change everything. You will never go out. You will never do this. You will never do that. And we were determined for that not to be the case. And we put her under many a table in a restaurant, and we got babysitters at least once a week. And I feel like that really set an expectation from the beginning. We kept our marriage. Now, not everything is perfect, but that is one thing we did. And I feel like that's allowed us to parent together really well, because we've just always been a team. We were a team before they came along, and we'll be a team when Powers, who is right here, graduates from high school, and it's just us again. So that would be my advice to young parents, is don't let that child, all their activities and all that come before. It's like, put the oxygen mask on the parents before you put it on the kid every time. If you're not on the same page or happy together, they can, that all trickles down to them, you know? So, and again, that doesn't apply to, I guess, single parents, but they have to take care of themselves and be whole and feeling good and well if they're going to take care of their kids. Erin, don't you have the youngest kid?
Mine are 4 and 7.
They're 4 and 7 or 4th grade?
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about all this?
I mean, I agree. I mean, pandemic obviously has made things a little bit harder, but I mean, we've always tried to, you know, have a couple weekends a year at least, you know, hopefully longer periods of time where we, you know, go on a trip together, or, you know, just stuff like that. And luckily we've got really supportive grandparents who are always happy to take them. But I mean, I definitely agree that you need to like continually work on that relationship. You know, otherwise, you know, we're going to end up where they've left the house and we have no idea, you know, who we are.
That's right.
Yeah. And then also just with like activities and stuff like that, we've always said, you know, you can do like, maybe we can do 2 nights where we are doing tennis lessons or gymnastics or something like that. But we don't want, you know, every single night to revolve around their activities and, you know, and stuff like that. We want to have like nurture that family time where we're eating dinner together, or, you know, something like that.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
I remember one time I was, on some sort of PTA committee, and called these people that had kids about the same age as mine. These were, you know, high school era. They had 4 and I had 3, so it was busy. But the mother, I asked them to be on this committee, and the mother said no. She didn't say I'll think about it, or I'll do something else, but she just said, you know, we made a decision that our family has got as many things going on as we can take on right now. And as a mother and wife, I feel like I need to say no. And it's a good cause you're asking me to do, but it's not, you get somebody else. There are others out there. And I remember at the time thinking, God, I can't believe she said no. Everybody accepts what a friend calls and asks them to do on the committee. But I later respected them for that. And I couldn't see it at the time, but that's kind of what Aaron said made me think of that.
Yeah, I also think like support systems are really good. We're lucky enough where our small group, our 2020 group has been meeting since 2012. And a few people have like come and gone, but for the most part, we've got a really great group of people who, kind of have similar philosophies as us. And, we've been able to learn from them. And, we try to look at different topics, like in our small group, like we might have a semester where we're talking about marriage or when we're talking about family. And so that's been really good to have good examples of people to learn from. And, if something's really hard for us, I know I've got friends who have, been through the same thing. So.
Well, I'm gonna have to cut us off for time, but I have always appreciated this. I obviously, as we all know, don't have kids, but maybe I'm the person who in like 15 years, whenever I'm parenting, will be like, I remember there was this parenting class at Christ Church. This is stuck in my brain forever. So thanks for this conversation and for being willing to share and be vulnerable this morning and all learn together. Would anybody like to close us in prayer this morning?
I'll do it.
Thank you.
The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Right. Lord, thank you for this time that we've had together this morning. Thank you for Addie, who prepared this. Thank you for Andy Stanley and the program that we're able to participate with each of us as we parent and be with all those who are struggling to do their best as parents now. And we just pray for each child and each parent and grandparent in these relationships that can be so complicated, but also so rewarding and so much a part of our lives. And help us all to strive to be better parents as we go forward. Be with us during the coming week. We ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Well, thanks for being with us this morning, and I will see y'all next week.